Earlier, Mason had agreed to the most outrageous, unbelievable deal of his entire life. An agreement so surreal that even now, months later, he sometimes woke in the middle of the night wondering whether he had imagined the entire thing. During those endless hospital nights when he lay on a stiff cot waiting for updates on Ellie, his daughter, his world, his reason for breathing, he had replayed it again and again. He had agreed to give billionaire Caroline Aldrich a child. In exchange, she would pay for the surgery that would save Ellie's life. Ellie, his sweet, sick little girl with bright blue eyes, had undergone her operation successfully. She was healing, laughing again, painting little sunflowers on scrap paper. Caroline was now pregnant, and somehow, impossibly, between two people who had been born into opposite worlds, something had begun to grow. Not love, not yet, but something gentler, understanding, a warmth they had both forgotten existed, a steady concern neither had expected. Mason thought the hardest part was behind him. He was wrong, because someone else had seen everything. Henderson, vice chairman of Aldrich Corporation, a man who had hunger for power behind polished shoes and a courteous smile, had been watching. Henderson, who had waited years for Caroline to stumble. Henderson, who would burn her entire legacy to ash if it meant he could take her place. And now he held photographs, proof weapons, that could destroy Caroline's reputation and her life overnight. As if that wasn't enough, trouble struck from another direction. Dana, Mason's ex-wife, the woman who abandoned Ellie at her sickest, suddenly resurfaced. She wanted to see her child, demanded it, but danger wasn't only coming from outside. Fate had never been merciful to either of them, and always took its price. And when Caroline made a new proposal, something even more outrageous than the first, Mason was forced to confront the question he had spent his whole life avoiding. Could he truly love this woman? And if he could, would that love be strong enough to protect him from what was coming? Everything began on a Friday afternoon. Mason had just returned from visiting Ellie at the hospital. Her cheeks were finally pink again. She had laughed at his joke. She had held his hand, without wincing. It was the first day he had felt a bit of hope. When he reached the mansion, he found Margaret, the housekeeper 30 years, waiting at the door, wringing her hands. "Mr. Calloway," she said, eyes downcast. "Mrs. Aldrich wants to see you. Immediately. In her office." "What happened?" Margaret only shook her head and looked away. No explanation. No comfort. Just worry. Mason walked down the long corridor, past portraits of generations of Aldriches, until he reached Caroline's office. The door was open. She stood with her back to him, facing the tall windows. Her shoulders were tense, too still, as if she were afraid that as she moved, she might shatter. "Caroline," Mason said gently. It was the first time he had called her by her first name. Something in him had shifted. He didn't know when exactly the distance between them had shrunk, but formality suddenly felt wrong. Caroline turned around slowly. Her face was pale. "Henderson knows." Those two words hit him like ice water. "Knows, what do you mean?" She didn't speak. Instead, she handed him a brown envelope. Inside were photographs. A photo of Mason leaving the mansion. A photo of Mason and Caroline standing near the window. A photo of Mason holding her hand in the garden. And one more, taken from far but clear enough, Caroline resting her head on Mason's shoulder. "He hired a private investigator," Caroline whispered. Her voice trembled despite her efforts to keep it steady. "For the past 2 weeks. I didn't know." Mason stared at the pictures, as if they were bullets instead of paper. "What does he plan to do with these?" "He called me." Caroline slowly lowered herself into her chair, her hands instinctively circling her stomach. "He said that if I don't resign as CEO and sign over control to him, he'll send these to the media, to shareholders, to everyone." "Resign!" Mason's voice cracked. "You built this company." "I know," she snapped, bitterness cutting through her tone. "He doesn't care. He's waited for this moment for years. And now, here's what he needs." Mason knelt in front of her. "We'll find a way," he said. "There has to be a way." "What way, Mason?" She stared at him, her eyes full of despair. "Those photos are real. What's between us is real. if the press gets a hold of this. They'll twist it. Female CEO pays janitor to get her pregnant. Can you imagine that? She stood abruptly, pacing like a trapped animal. It's not just humiliation, she said hoarsely. The stock will crash. Partners will pull out. Everything my father built will crumble. Mason stood slowly, his heart twisted. This was his fault. If he hadn't walked into her life, if he hadn't accepted her deal, "I'll leave," he whispered. "You can tell Henderson I was just a gardener, or some distant acquaintance." "And the baby?" Caroline turned to him, her eyes sharp with despair. "Do you think Henderson will ignore the fact that I'm pregnant with no father?" Mason went silent. She was right. Leaving wouldn't fix anything. "So, what do you plan to do?" he asked softly. Caroline stopped pacing. The silence grew heavy around them. Then she looked up. "There is one way." "What way?" "We get married." Mason blinked. He was certain he heard wrong. "What?" "We get married," she repeated. "Then nothing is a scandal. Nothing is illegal or immoral. I'll be a CEO marrying the man she loves. A woman carrying her husband's child. Normal, acceptable, untouchable. But that would be a lie. This world," she whispered, "is full of lies. Caroline." She looked at him, exhausted, so very tired. Marriages in high society rarely involve love. They're contracts, arrangements. At least between us, there is respect. Mason shook his head. His pulse thundered in his ears. "A marriage? To her? I can't," he said quietly. "This isn't how things should happen." "Then how should it happen?" Caroline stepped toward him, her eyes glistening, not with anger, but fear. "Do you have a better idea? Can you make Henderson disappear? Can you save my company?" Silence. Caroline looked away. "I'm not forcing you," she said softly. "You already fulfilled your half of the deal. Ellie received her surgery. You can walk away. I will not take anything back." Her voice cracked. "But if you stay, if you help me through this, I will make sure you and Ellie never have to worry again." Two paths lay before him. One, he could leave, run far, protect Ellie from the chaos. The other, marry her, support her, face the world beside her. He thought of Caroline, crying alone in her late mother's room. Caroline reading children's books at midnight. Caroline trembling from exhaustion, but still trying to work. Caroline who had saved Ellie. He stepped closer. "If I agree," Mason said very quietly, "this won't be a fake marriage." Caroline frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I want it to be real. At least a chance at real." He swallowed hard. Not just a performance. Caroline froze. Something fragile flickered in her eyes. He reached for her hand. "Are you willing to try?" Caroline stared at their joined hands. The callous hand of a man who had carried his daughter through hell, holding hers as if she wasn't a billionaire. Not a CO, not untouchable, but a woman. A lonely woman. "I don't know how to love anymore," she whispered. "Then we'll learn," he said. And finally, she nodded. Caroline's grip tightened around Mason's sleeve as they walked. "She's always like this," she muttered under her breath. "She pretends to be cordial for exactly 2 minutes, and then the ice returns." Mason didn't reply. He didn't trust himself to. His gaze stayed fixed on Caroline, scanning every shift in her expression. Her confidence, the armor she wore like a second skin, flickered in places where Hollis's barbs had landed. She wasn't made of steel. She only pretended to be. They stepped into the main room, a sweeping lounge filled with deep navy couches and warm amber lights. High-profile guests mingled in clusters, glasses clinking, laughter rippling. Caroline immediately straightened her spine, smoothing her hands over the simple, elegant dress she'd chosen, one that didn't scream wealth, though she easily could have. "Remember," she said, "you're here as the father of my child. No one needs to know anything else." Mason nodded. "Fine by me." She stopped walking, turned to him, and "Thank you for coming. My mother's opinion shouldn't matter anymore, but somehow it still does." Mason's voice softened. "You don't owe her anything, Caroline. You've built your own life, your own empire. I know," she said quietly. But sometimes it still feels like I'm 16. A server approached with 2 glasses of sparkling cider, and Caroline took hers instantly. Not alcohol. She wasn't risking a thing. Did you ever think, she said, a wry smile tugging at her lips, that agreeing to have a baby with a complete stranger would drag you into society events and under the microscope of people you've never met? No, Mason said honestly. But then again, I also didn't expect a stranger to become someone I actually care about. Caroline's eyes shot to his. For a moment, the air shifted, softened, warmed. But before she could respond, Hollis's voice cut into the room like a shard of glass. Everyone, she called with a too bright smile, may I have your attention for a moment? Caroline stiffened beside him. Mason muttered, What the hell is she doing? Hollis gestured for crowd to quiet. As many of you know, my daughter Caroline has made certain life decisions recently. Caroline's jaw clenched. Mason stepped slightly closer. And tonight, Hollis continued, she has brought along the, father of a child. The room went silent. Dozens of faces turned toward them. Mason heard Caroline's breath catch. Not because she was ashamed, because her mother had found a way to twist the truth into a spectacle. Hollis's smile iced over. This is Mason Reed. Mason stared at her. Hollis didn't blink. Caroline's fingers trembled once, just once, before she forced herself into motion and stepped forward. Mother, she said tightly, this is not the time. Nonsense, Hollis replied. These people are practically family. Most of them didn't bother remembering I existed growing up, Caroline shot back. A few guests shifted awkwardly, but Hollis smiled. Well, tonight we change that. Tonight, my daughter has chosen a man whose background is rather unique for our circles. Mason understood what she meant. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't polished. He wasn't one of them. Caroline's hand gripped his, but Hollis didn't stop. And while I, of course, support my daughter's choices wholeheartedly, that will be the first time, Caroline snapped. A gasp rippled through the room. Hollis's mask slipped for one fraction of a second. Then, smoothly, I do find it admirable that she's taken an interest in philanthropy. Caroline flinched as though slapped. Mason's blood went hot. Before he could stop himself, he stepped forward. With all due respect, Mason said, his voice steady and low, I'm not a charity case. I'm the father of a child. That's it. Nothing more you need to announce. Hollis's eyebrow arched. Is that so? Yes, Mason said. And Caroline doesn't owe you a performance, or an apology for being her own person. The room was silent. Caroline blinked slowly, as if letting his words settle. He didn't look at her, but he could feel it. The way she was seeing him differently again, not as a contract, not as an obligation, as someone standing on her side. Hollis folded her arms. Quite a bold tone. Someone needed to say it, Mason replied. The silence stretched. Then a man near the fireplace clapped once, then twice. Then more people joined in. Not loud, not mocking, supportive. Caroline's lips parted, stunned. Hollis's expression turned to stone. Excuse me, Caroline whispered, tugging Mason toward a side hallway. As soon as they were out of sight, she stopped, pressed a hand to her forehead, and laughed, a breathless, shaking laugh. I can't believe you did that. Should I apologize? Mason asked. No, she looked up at him, cheeks flushed. No, you shouldn't. Her voice softened. No one has ever spoken to my mother like that. Not for me. He held her gaze. That's surprising. Caroline swallowed. That's my life. Everyone listens to her. Everyone folds. Everyone except, she hesitated, except you. Something pulsed between them, an awareness they both tried to pretend wasn't there. Caroline exhaled shakily. Mason, I know we said this wouldn't get complicated. I know we promised ourselves it was purely practical. But lately, his heart thumped hard once. But lately, she repeated, I don't feel like I'm walking through this alone. You're not, he said. She looked up, really looked, as if trying to see who he was underneath the rough edges he'd learned to live with. And then, A sudden tremor ran through her. Mason's expression sharpened. Caroline, she touched her stomach. It's nothing, just strained nerves. But her face had gone pale. Mason's concern flared instantly. Sit down. I'm fine. Sit down, he said again more firmly. There was a bench nearby, and he guided her to it. She pressed a hand to her abdomen, breathing carefully. It's early, she whispered. Too early for anything to be wrong. Mason crouched in front of her. Hey, look at me. She lifted her gaze. We're going to the doctor, he said. She opened her mouth to protest, but he didn't let her. No arguments. Not one. What about the event? Caroline. His voice softened but didn't waver. I don't care about this event, and neither should you. What matters is you. And the baby. Her throat tightened. She nodded. They stood and moved toward the exit. Guests watched them leave. Some whispered. Some stared. But Caroline didn't flinch. Not once. Outside, as the cold air brushed her face, she exhaled shakily. Thank you for everything. You don't have to thank me, he said. I do. Her voice trembled. Because I've never had anyone who put me first. He stopped walking. Caroline's breath caught. Mason reached out, gently tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. You do now. Her eyes glistened, not with weakness, but with something she rarely allowed herself to feel. Trust. Mason, she whispered. But he didn't kiss her. He just held her gaze, long enough to say everything neither of them was ready to speak aloud. And then he walked her toward the car, opening the door, making sure she was settled safely before getting in beside her. As the driver pulled away from the glowing mansion behind them, Caroline rested a hand over her stomach. I think, she said softly, that this is how it starts. What? Mason asked. She looked at him with calm certainty. A family. Mason turned to her, the city lights flickering across his features. And for the first time in years, maybe ever, he let the hope Indiana. The real kind. The kind that builds something new where life once only took. Caroline reached for his hand. He didn't hesitate. Not this time. They sat like that all the way to the clinic. Two people from opposite worlds, bound by a promise neither of them expected to begin changing them so deeply. But it was too late to go back. Something had begun. Not love. Not yet. But something that could become it. Something real. Something theirs. Something that, for the first time, belonged to them both.